She smuggled the exiled cub past every guard. His father's army was right behind her. Her grandmother used to say, "A wolf without a pack is not a lesser creature. It is a freer one." Sable Marin had never owned much. She kept those words folded inside her chest the way other women kept keepsakes in lockets, pressed close to the heart, worn smooth by years of quiet handling. She was wolfless, as the Valley people said, with the particular curl of the lip that turned a simple fact into an indictment. No shift, no bond, no packmark burning silver on her wrist. Just a girl made of marrow and stubbornness, and the faint herbal smell of the apothecary, where she'd learned to earn her bread. She had never expected those words to be tested quite so literally, but that was before she found the cub in her root cellar, shivering beneath a burlap sack, with a bruise the size of a fist blooming across his temple, and the whole Ironmane army 3 hours behind him. Chapter 1. What She Found in the Dark. The root cellar beneath Sable's cottage smelled of dried yarrow and cold earth and the faint sweetness of the apple stores she hadn't yet touched. She went down at dusk to retrieve chamomile for a tea she'd been promising herself all day, and she almost stepped on him. A child. Perhaps 7 years old, perhaps younger. Hunger tended to shrink children. He was curled on his side between 2 crates of turnips, his dark hair matted, his breathing the shallow, hitching kind that told her immediately he had been running for a very long time. He was dressed in cloth that had once been expensive, she could tell by the remaining stitching at the collar, and around his neck on a leather cord hung a small iron disc, stamped with a sigil she recognized the way one recognizes a storm, with a cold drop in the stomach. The Ironmane crest. Sable stood very still. The village of Dunmere sat on the disputed fringe of 3 territories, which meant its residents had learned long ago that politics were weather, best observed from indoors. Everyone in Dunmere knew the name Ironmane. Everyone knew that the Alpha King, Revel Ironmane, had one heir. And everyone who traded goods along the North Road had heard, 3 days ago, the proclamation. The heir had been declared impure, a wolfless shame to the bloodline, and exiled by order of the Alpha King himself. Any who aided him would share his exile. Any who concealed him would be counted an enemy of the Ironmane throne. The child's eyes opened. They were gray, the particular gray of river water before rain, and they were, despite everything, proud. Even now. Even shaking. "Are you going to scream?" he asked. "I was going to make chamomile tea," Sable said. "Are you hungry?" Something in the boy's face cracked, just slightly, at the word hungry. He didn't answer, because children who have been running don't trust kindness fast enough to speak it, but he sat up slowly, and he did not run. She brought him upstairs. His name, he told her, between spoonfuls of soup that she heated with trembling hands, was Cale. Cale Ironmane, son of Revel, formerly heir to the territories of the Northern Pax. He said it like a recitation, the way children say things they have been told to be proud of, even when the pride has started to hurt. He had no wolf. Not yet, and possibly not ever. His father had convened a council of elders on his 7th naming day, and the elders had declared the bond simply not present. No flicker, no ember. The Alpha King, who built empires on the mythology of strength, could not have a wolfless heir. The exile decree had been issued before sundown of the same day. "He sent guards," Cale said, looking at his soup. "I heard them talking. They're supposed to bring me back to the border. Leave me on the other side." "How did you end up in my root cellar?" "I ran." He looked up at her. "For 2 days." Sable thought about her grandmother's saying. She thought about the bruise on Cale's temple, which was the size of a grown man's fist, and which had not been made by running. She made her decision before she fully understood she was making it. "Finish your soup," she said. "Then I need to think." Chapter 2. The Shape of a Plan. Dunmere had 3 roads out and 12 guards on rotation, which Sable knew because she delivered medicines along all of them and had spent 3 years learning which guards napped, which ones had sweet teeth, and which ones were afraid of her satchel of remedies for no reason she'd ever been able to identify. She laid the options out in her head, while Cale slept on her settle bench, wrapped in her grandmother's wool blanket, the old green one with the raveled edge she'd never been able to bring herself to mend. He slept hard, the way children sleep when their bodies have finally decided there is nothing left to run on. The North Road was out. That was the direction the Iron Mane soldiers would come from. The East Road crossed the ridge above the valley, and in autumn, with a small child, it was 3 days of exposed walking. The West Road passed through the village square and the gatehouse where old Proc, the senior guard, slept in shifts of 2 hours and considered himself very alert. That left Brennan's Way, not a road at all, technically. A drove road, used for moving livestock to the autumn markets, which ran south through the marshwood and emerged 12 miles down at the river crossing. It was not watched, because it was not officially a road. It was watched by mud and cold, and the biting marsh flies that arrived with dusk. Sable was good with mud and cold. She was good with discomfort. Wolfless girls who wanted to survive learned that early. She packed while Cale slept. She packed her satchel with medicines, not as disguise, but because they would genuinely need them, and she wrapped their provisions tightly in oilcloth. She added her grandmother's bone-handled knife in its leather sheath, not because she expected to use it, but because her grandmother had said the same thing about it, and it had saved her once. Then she sat down beside the sleeping boy and looked at the iron disc on its cord around his neck. Anyone who found them would know him by it. Any soldier, any informant, any loyal pack member who'd seen the proclamation nailed to a tree. She reached out and very gently closed her fingers around it, meaning to tuck it beneath his collar. Cale's hand shot up and caught her wrist. He was awake, or he had never fully slept. "Don't," he said. "It marks you. It's mine." His gray eyes were fierce and frightened in equal measure. "It's the only thing that's mine." Sable understood that better than he could know. She let go. "Then keep it under your shirt. Every moment. Do you understand?" He nodded and tucked the disc away himself. She woke him properly at the hour before dawn. Chapter 3. Brennan's Way. The marshwood at night was the kind of dark that had texture, wet and fibrous, pressing against the skin. Sable moved with the low lamp shuttered to a sliver of light, just enough to avoid the worst of the pooling water. Cale walked behind her, his hand occasionally finding the back of her coat when the ground shifted unexpectedly, never asking for help, but accepting it in that unconscious way when it arrived. He was quiet, and he was quick, and he had, she noticed, a very good sense of where his feet were. Better than hers, actually, which she suspected was some vestige of the wolf nature he'd been told he lacked. It was not absent. It was simply expressed differently. She kept that observation to herself, because it was not the right moment, and because she was not certain she knew how to say it. 2 miles in, they heard horses. Not close, sound carried strangely in the marshwood, bent by water and tree, but the direction was north, and the pace was the purposeful canter of searchers rather than travelers. Sable put her hand back immediately, and felt Cale's grip close around her wrist, tight and steady. She pressed them both against the root mass of an ancient marsh oak and killed the lamp entirely. In the dark, she was acutely aware of the child's breathing beside her, controlled, deliberate. He was frightened, but he was managing it. She matched his rhythm without meaning to, and they breathed together in the black beneath the oak's roots while the hoofbeats swept north and then curved east, following the road she had specifically chosen not to take. When the sound faded, Cale exhaled. "How many?" he whispered. 8, maybe 10. She reopened the lamp a crack. "Your father sent more than I expected." "He does things thoroughly," said without any bitterness she could hear, which somehow was worse. They pressed on. Around the 4th mile, Cale's foot punched through a false floor of marsh reeds, and he went into the knee, gasping at the cold, and Sable pulled him out by the arm and made him sit on a mossy stone while she checked his leg and unlaced his boot and wrung out his stocking with hands that were already numb. She worked quickly. He watched her face the whole time. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. She pulled his stocking back on, then his boot. "Because someone should." "That's not a reason." "It's enough of one." She tied the lace. "My grandmother used to say that a wolf without a pack is not a lesser creature. It's a freer one. I think that applies to cubs as much as wolves." Cale considered this. Then, "I might get a wolf eventually. The elders aren't always right." "They're frequently not," Sable said, standing and shouldering her satchel. "Come on." He came. Chapter 4. The River Crossing. Dawn found them at the edge of the marshwood, wet to varying degrees, bitten in multiple places, and 20 feet from the south bank of the Aran River, which was the border of Ironmane territory. The crossing was a series of flat stones, old and rounded by centuries of use, that a careful person could traverse without getting more than their ankles wet. On the far bank, the land belonged to the Thornweld Pax. Independent territory, treaty-bound to accept refugees, theoretically neutral. Theoretically. The problem was the man standing on this side of the stones. He was alone, which was unexpected. He stood with his back to them, looking south across the water, and he was dressed in road clothes rather than soldier's kit. A dark coat, good boots, a sword at his hip that he wore like a man who'd been born to it rather than trained to it. He was tall. Even from behind in the early morning mist, he had the quality of stillness that very powerful shifters cultivated, the absence of wasted movement that declared itself like a held note in a quiet room. Sable stopped. She pulled Cale behind her. The man turned around. She had never seen Ravel Ironmane in person. She had seen the proclamation, which bore his seal. She had heard descriptions from the traders, who spoke of him in the tones used for geography. Vast, unmovable, cold in winter, and unpredictable when warm. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s perhaps, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and gray eyes that were, she registered with a cold shock, the exact shade of the child behind her. He looked at her. Then he looked at Cale. No one spoke for what felt like a very long time. Then Cale stepped out from behind her, very deliberately, and stood beside her instead. Ravel Ironmane's face did something complicated. He took a step forward. "Don't." Sable's voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. She stepped forward too, which put her between them, which was frankly insane, but she had her grandmother's knife in her satchel, and she was standing on the bones of every overlooked, dismissed, wolfless girl who had ever decided that enough was enough. "You declared him exiled. You struck him, and you sent soldiers after him, and you declared him unworthy. Of his name, of his birthright, of his father, on the basis of nothing but your own fear of what your peers would think." Ravel stopped. "I am wolfless," she continued, because she was terrified, and so she could not afford to stop talking. "I have been dismissed my entire life for that. I know exactly what it looks like when power decides that a person is inconvenient. Your son is 7 years old. Whatever you have decided he is, he walked 2 days through open country with a bruised skull before I found him. He moved through 5 miles of marshwood in the dark without complaint. He is the bravest person I have met in recent memory, and he is standing right here, so whatever you intend to do, you should at least look at him while you do it." The river ran. The mist moved. A bird called somewhere in the reeds. Ravel Ironmane looked at his son. Cale lifted his chin. Chapter 5. What a King Looks Like Undone. It happened slowly, the way she imagined glaciers moved, imperceptibly, and then all at once. Ravel Ironmane's composure, which had the architectural quality of something built deliberately over many years, developed a fracture. It started around the eyes. He looked at Cale. Really looked, the way he perhaps hadn't on the naming day, when he'd been looking instead at the elders' faces, and the faces of his council, and the accumulated weight of what was expected of him. And his face simply came apart. He crossed the remaining distance and went to his knees in the mud of the riverbank, which was remarkable, and put his hands on his son's shoulders, which was necessary, and said nothing, because there was nothing that functioned as an adequate first word. Cale did not immediately yield. He stood straight and kept his chin up and looked at his father with those river-gray eyes, and Sable could see the effort of it, the way a child holds their dignity, because they have learned it may be the only thing no one can take. Then Ravel said, quietly, against his son's hair, "I was wrong." 3 words, barely audible. Cale's chin came down. He pressed his face against his father's shoulder, and Sable looked away, at the river, giving them the privacy of the moment. She was shaking, she noticed. The inside of her knees felt like unset jelly. She had just spoken that way to an alpha king. She pressed her palm flat against the nearest tree and breathed. Behind her, she heard Ravel say, "Who is she?" Cale's voice, slightly muffled. "Sable. She makes medicine, and she's not afraid of anything." A pause, then Ravel. "I should like to speak to her." "You should probably thank her first," Cale said. "She was up all night." Sable turned around. Ravel had risen. He was looking at her with the gray eyes that his son had inherited, and in them was something she had not anticipated. Not irritation, not the wounded pride of a man who had been lectured by a wolfless apothecary's girl at 6 a.m. Something closer to recognition. The thing a powerful person's face does when it encounters a truth it cannot dismiss. "Your name is Sable Marin?" He said it like he was memorizing it. "It is. My soldiers will arrive at Dunmere within the hour. I came ahead." He paused, and the pause had texture. "I came ahead because I received word last night from a rider I'd sent to monitor the exile route. He described a woman, wolfless, who had been seen at the marshwood edge with a small boy. And I realized I had..." Another pause. "I had made a catastrophic error. On multiple fronts." Sable waited. "I am rescinding the exile decree, effective immediately." He said it like he was saying it to himself as much as to her. "Cale will come home, and I will require time to repair what I have broken." He looked at his son, who was watching him with 7-year-old gravity. "If he will allow it." "That's up to him," Sable said. "Not me." Cale looked at his father for a long moment. Then he put his small hand in Ravel's large one and held it, and did not let go. Chapter 6. The morning after an impossible night. The Iron Mane soldiers arrived not as the fearsome column Sable had imagined, but as a dusty, slightly disorganized group of 12 who reined up at the riverbank and looked visibly relieved to find the situation resolved. Their captain, a gray-haired woman named Aldrich Voss, surveyed the scene. Alpha King kneeling in the mud, small exile holding his hand, wolfless apothecary standing nearby with marshgrass in her hair, and very professionally chose not to comment. Cale was wrapped in someone's spare riding coat. He accepted food from Aldrich's saddlebag with the grave politeness of a child who had been well raised by someone other than his father, and was choosing to demonstrate it. Sable sat on a river stone and tried to feel her feet, which were very cold. Ravel came and stood near her. Not over her, near her. There was a distinction, and she noticed he was careful with it. "You could have been exiled for aiding him," he said. "I was aware of the proclamation." "Then why?" She thought about this. The sun was properly up now, shedding thin autumn light across the Aran, and it caught the iron disc around Cale's neck where it had slipped out from his collar during breakfast. His crest, his only thing that was his. It caught the disc and threw a small coin of reflected light onto the ground. "Because the decree was wrong," Sable said. "And I knew that, and I knew I could do something. That's generally enough." Ravel was quiet for a moment. "My council will want to know how a wolfless woman transported the exiled heir through the marshwood, without detection." "Carefully," Sable said, "and with very good boots." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the neighborhood of a thing she suspected hadn't happened near him in some time. He sat down on a stone beside her, which was a remarkable choice for an Alpha King, and a thing she decided not to comment on. KL said you told him that a wolf without a pack is not a lesser creature, Ravel said. That it's a freer one. It was my grandmother's saying. It's a good one. He looked at the river. I have spent 20 years building a definition of strength that would not have accommodated your grandmother. I find that on reflection the poorer for it. Sable looked at him sideways. He was not a simple man, she could already tell. He was someone who had been given the wrong map at a formative age and had traveled it faithfully and arrived somewhere that looked correct from the outside and was wrong in every way that mattered. That was its own kind of damage, distinct from cruelty, though capable of producing the same results. The bruise on Kael's temple, she said, carefully. Ravel's jaw tightened. My hand, said very quietly. On the naming day. I will not excuse it. I'm not asking you to. She paused. I'm asking you to understand that a boy remembers that. For the rest of his life, in some room of himself, he will carry it. What you do next determines what room it lives in. He was quiet for a very long time. I understand that, he said finally. She believed him. Chapter 7. The price of being seen, they returned to Dunmere, the Alpha King. His heir, his soldiers, and the wolfless apothecary and the village watched from doorways and windows in the manner of people who are witnessing something unprecedented and are not certain whether it calls for celebration or concealment. Ravel Ironmane stood in the village square and did an unprecedented thing. He had his proclamation physically removed from the notice board by one of his own soldiers. In front of the assembled witnesses, he said without flourish that it had been issued in error and that the Ironmane heir was restored, and that any consequences for those who had aided the young heir during the period of the decree's existence were voided. He looked at Sable when he said that last part, and a few of the braver villagers looked at her too. It was, objectively, a lot of attention for a wolfless apothecary who had been largely invisible in Dunmere for 3 years. KL stayed close to Sable's side through all of it with the instinct of someone who has found a fixed point and is not ready to let go. She let him stay. She showed him her apothecary, the bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, the rows of small glass jars that caught the afternoon light and threw it in colored fragments across the floor. And he asked intelligent questions about each one until his eyes grew heavy and she found him a chair and he slept sitting up, his head tipped against the wall, the iron disc glinting at his throat. Ravel came in as the afternoon light was going gold. He filled the doorframe of her apothecary the way large men who have learned not to impose themselves learn to fill a doorframe carefully, taking up less room than the frame would permit. I need to return to the capital, he said. There is much to the council, the elders, the decree's aftermath. It will take months. I imagine so. Kael has asked whether you might come. He looked at the sleeping boy, then at her. As I would offer a formal position. An apothecary of standing. The capital city has need of good healers. Sable looked at her apothecary. At the glass jars and the dried herbs and the 3 years of quiet, invisible life she had built here, which was safe and small and hers. She thought about a boy walking 2 days through open country on a bruised skull. She thought about her grandmother's saying, worn smooth in her chest. I'll need to pack, she said. Something happened to Ravel Ironmane's face that was private enough that she felt she should not look at it directly. We leave at dawn, he said. Take whatever time you need before then. She packed her medicines. She packed her grandmother's bone-handled knife. She packed the green wool blanket with the raveled edge, which smelled of marsh and cold and a child's relieved sleep, and which she found she could not leave behind. Chapter 8. What stays the road to the capital was 4 days. And they were 4 days unlike anything Sable's quiet life had previously contained. Kael rode with her on the second horse he had declared he did not want to ride with the soldiers, and his father had, without argument, accepted this, and they talked the entire way. He asked about every plant they passed. He had, she discovered, a memory like a jar of clear water, holding everything you poured into it without distortion. She named things and their uses and their properties, and he repeated them back to her an hour later, perfectly, and added questions she hadn't thought of. Ravel rode at the front of the column, but he fell back, sometimes, to where they were. He didn't force conversation. He listened to the one already happening, and she would occasionally look up and find him watching her with the gray eyes she was becoming accustomed to, and the expression that she was beginning to understand was not sternness but a man very carefully learning to look at things he had looked away from for a long time. On the 4th day, Kyle found a stone in the road, flat and gray and smooth, shot through with a single vein of white quartz. He picked it up, turned it over, and handed it to Sable. "For your collection," he said. She did not have a collection, technically, but she took the stone because it had been given in the specific spirit of 7-year-olds who have decided you are their person, and she put it in her coat pocket. That night, at the last inn before the capital, Ravel found her sitting outside with the stone in her palm, looking at the first stars. He sat beside her without asking, which she had come to understand was not presumption, but the particular ease of someone who has decided you are worth sitting beside and wants you to know it. "He's asleep," Ravel said. "He asked me 3 questions about Wolfsbane and then went out like a lamp. He has a very good mind. He has." Said with a quality she had not expected, simple, uncomplicated pride. The kind a parent grows into, with difficulty. He wants to know if wolves can learn herbalism. Specifically whether a wolf nose improves the identification of medicinal versus toxic plants. "It almost certainly does," Sable said. "I'd love to study it." Ravel looked at the stone in her palm. "May I ask you something? You are a king. You'll ask regardless." The almost laugh again. Warmer this time. "I've been told by people I respect that I am a man who confuses utility with worth, who values people for what they do rather than what they are." A pause. "I am asking you not as the Alpha King, but as a man who has spent 4 days watching you talk to his son about yarrow and rivers and why marshwood owls are different from forest owls. I am asking whether he stopped." "Whether what?" "Whether you might allow me to learn to see you properly, not as the woman who saved him, though that is more than I can repay, but as yourself." Sable closed her fingers around the stone from Kyle. "That," she said carefully, "would depend on whether you're capable of seeing someone who has nothing to offer your dynasty. No wolf, no packmark, no political alliance. Just," she gestured vaguely at herself, "this." "Then it depends," Ravel said, "on whether you believe a man can change the map he was given and learn to navigate by better ones." She thought about her grandmother. She thought about wolves without packs. She thought about a 7-year-old standing up straight with his chin lifted on a riverbank, holding his dignity like the only coin in his pocket. "I think a man who can say I was wrong on his knees in the mud before his son has at least begun the process," she said. He reached over and took her hand, not the hand with the stone, the other one, and held it the way people hold things they are afraid of losing. Carefully, and with their whole attention. She let him. Epilogue. 1 year later, a wolf without a pack is not a lesser creature. It is a freer one. The saying was carved now small letters, unpretentious, in the stone above the door of the royal apothecary that Sable Marin Ironmane had built in the eastern wing of the capital keep. She hadn't asked for it to be carved. She'd come in one morning to find it there, freshly done, with a small boy sitting cross-legged beneath it, looking entirely innocent. The apothecary smelled of thyme and lamp black, and the particular woody sweetness of the cedar shelves Ravel had commissioned without being asked, because he had learned over the course of a year to pay attention. He was still learning. He was genuinely, persistently, earnestly learning, which Sable had come to believe was better than natural aptitude, because it didn't run out. She kept the green blanket on the settle bench in the apothecary's warmest corner, where Kale still napped between their afternoon lessons, increasingly less often as he grew, and increasingly more when he'd been pushing himself too hard on the training grounds. He had not yet manifested a wolf, and the new council, the old elders had been retired with rather pointed courtesy, had issued a revised guidance document, principally authored by Sable, on wolfless pack-born members and their gifts. It was thorough, evidence-based, and caused considerable productive disruption. Kale had left a stone on her desk when she'd finished it. Just a river stone, gray, shot through with white, tucked under the corner of the manuscript. She kept the stone beside her ink jar. She picked it up now, turning it in her fingers, watching the autumn light come through the apothecary's high window and break across the shelves of glass jars, amber and green and pale gold. Behind her, the door opened. "Council ran over," Ravel said, and there was the sound of his coat hitting the hook, the familiar weight of him crossing the room. He came to stand behind her, not over her, and she felt him look at what she was looking at, the light on the jars, the stone in her palm, with the unhurried attention of a man who had learned that not everything required fixing, that some things simply needed to be seen. "Kale wants to begin the Wolfsbane unit this week," she said. "Kale wants to begin everything this week. He gets that from his father." She laughed and turned, and he was there. The gray eyes, the silver-threaded hair, the face that she had watched unlearn and relearn itself over 12 months of genuine effort. He was not finished. She didn't expect him to be. She was not finished either. He looked at the stone in her hand. "He gave me that on the road," she said. "I know. He told me. He said he was giving it to his person." Ravel's voice carried the thing it always carried when he spoke about Kale and Sable in the same breath. A fullness, like a room where the right people have finally arrived. She set the stone down on the windowsill where the light could reach it, and it threw a small, bright coin of reflection onto the wall. A wolf without a pack is not a lesser creature. It is a freer one. And a freer one, she thought, could choose exactly where to set down roots. She reached up and took Ravel's face in her hands. The Alpha King, her infuriating, improving, earnest husband who was still learning the better map. And she kissed him in the amber light of her own making, with the stone glinting on the sill and her grandmother's blanket on the settle and the carved saying above the door telling anyone who cared to look exactly who had built this place and how.